Good morning, friends. You all mostly welcome for this lecture series on the history of English literature. And in the feast of English literature, we are going to continue talking on the Victorian age, which timeline is between 1832 1890. This era is also called the age of Tennyson because there is something the part added or included by the devotion for the literature greatest writer Tennyson. Especially, it is this era is also called an era of peace. So there are some features of this era, such as an era of material affluence, political consciousness, democratic reforms, industrial and mechanical progress, scientific advancement, social unrest, educational expansion, empire building, and religious uncertainty. And at the beginning, whom about I'm going to talk about the greatest writer in this era, Alfred Lord Tennyson, whose life timeline is between 1809 to 1892, and he was became poet laureate in 1850. Austin says Tennyson's work as poetry of the drawing room. W.H. Auden says his genius was lyrical. A.S. Eliot says Tennyson is the great master of metric as well as of melancholia, who has the finest ear of any English poet since Milton. This is his first work, which title is Poems by Two Brothers. It is collaborated with his elder brother Charles. The another work, Timbuktu, is a prize poem, and for this poem, he won the Chancellor's Medal for English verse. And Timbuktu was written in blank verse. His next work, Poems Chiefly Lyrical. Actually, it is a immature poem. Yes, and there are two poems included in it, Isabel and Madeline. There is another work, a collection, poems. There are some poems included in this collection. The Lady of Shalott, Aene, Aenene. That the Lotus Eaters, the Palace of Art. The next work, Morte d'Arthur. It is the greatest work by Tennyson. This poem incorporated in the passing of Arthur, 1869, and this poem preceded by 169 lines and followed by 200, followed by 29, and it is a Tennyson's major Arthurian work. This describes the last moments of Arthur after the battle with moderate forces. This poem includes his elegy on the round table and delivered to Sir Bedivere. This is one of the famous line in it. The old order changed, building place to new. There is another poem, Ulysses, which appeared in 1842, composed in 1833, and published 1842. Ulysses is a dramatic monologue. Ulysses describes how he plans to set forth again from Ithaca after his safe return from his wanderings after the Trojan War to sail beyond the sunset. The episode is based on based not on Homer but on Dante, which Tennyson probably read in the translation of Carey. Poem expresses the poet's sense of the need of going forward and braving the struggle of life after the death of Helen. is another work, Locksley Hall. It is a poem written in Trochaics, and especially it is written probably in 1837 8. Consists of a monologue spoken by a disappointed lover. Next work, The Princess. Its full title is The Princess, a Medley. It is serio-comic attempt to handle the theme that was then known as the New Woman. Tennyson wrote of it to his friend Fitzgerald. I hate it, and so will you. Uh, Formed the basis of the satirical Gilbert and Sullivan opera, Princessa Ida. Is the next one of the greatest work by In Memory by Tennyson. The title of that poem is In Memoriam, which appeared in 1850. Its full title is In Memoriam AHH. It is a long series of meditations upon the death of Arthur Henry Hallam. Arthur Henry Hallam, who was died at Vienna on the age 22. The poem In Memoriam has elegiac theme. It was written in stanzas of four octosyllabic lines rhyming ABBA. This poem divided into 132 sections of varying length is a series of poems written over a considerable period, inspired by the changing moods of the author's regret for his lost friend and expressing his own anxieties about change, evolution, and immortality. The epilogue is a marriage song on the occasion of the wedding of the poet's sister Cecilia to Edward Lushington. Hallam had himself been engaged to his sister Emily. Lewis says this poem is the solace and delight of every house where poetry is loved. T.S. Eliot says In Memoriam is a poem of despair, but of despair of a religious kind. There is a next work, Ode on the Death of Wellington, for that the charge of the Light Brigade, which first published in the Examiner in 1852, for that Maud and other poems. The cheap poem, it's called a monodrama. It is a series of lyrics which reflect the love and hatred, the hope and despair. Idylls of the King is a series of 12 connected poems that Swinburne says our laureate should find in the ideal to cold his type of the ideal man. The next work, Enoch Arden. Uh, there are some shorter poems composed by Tennyson. First one, Locksley Hall, 60 years after, and the death of Anon. There are some plays also written by Tennyson, especially wrote three historical plays. Uh, there's Queen Mary, Harold, Bucket. There is another work, The Falcon, which is a comedy. It is based on a story from Boccaccio. So there's a Cup, which based on a story from Plutarch. So that the Foresters, it has Robin Hood theme, and in this way, Tennyson devoted himself for the development of poetry in Victorian era. There is another greatest poet in this era whose name is Robert Browning, whose timeline is 1812 to 1889, and especially his co-partner name is Elizabeth Barrett Browning. There is his first work, Pauline, which appeared in 1833. It is Browning's first work, an introspective poem. It has influence of Shelley. It was written in blank verse. Pauline has subtitled A Fragment of a Confession. Is a commentary on this poem by J.S. Mill in the form of an annotated copy. There is another work by Browning, Paracelsus. It is a dramatic poem. It wrote in blank verse. Next work is Strafford. It is a play. It is a tragedy in blank verse. It is written at the instigation of Macready, and Strafford deals with the events surrounding the impeachment of Strafford, Sir Thomas Wentworth. There is another work, Sordello. Sordello is a narrative poem in iambic pentameter couplets. It is an attempt to decide the relationship between art and life. So, it's set in the Italy during the period of the Gulf Ghibelline wars of the late 12th and 13th century. And Sordello is the most obscure work. There is another work, Bells and Pomegranates. Actually, Bells and Pomegranates has the covering title of a series of plays and collections of shorter dramatic poems, in which we find the first one, Pippa Passes. Although subtitle a drama, it was not written for the stage. Consists of an introduction in verse. Pippa Passes has four parts entitled Morning, Noon, Evening, and Night. The first two parts have a verse section followed by one in prose. The third part has two verse section. The fourth part has a prose section followed by one in verse. This combination of verse and prose was influenced by Browning's study of Elizabethan and Jacobean drama. The play is set in and around Asolo, a small town. Asolo is a small town near Venice. Pippa passes the famous concluding lines we find Pippa passes first song. One is God's in his heaven, all is right with the world. The next work, King Victor and King Charles, dramatic lyrics. Dramatic lyrics is actually a collection of poems. Number three of Bells and Pomegranates. It is a number three work, Bells and Pomegranates. After that, Browning's publisher Moxon persuaded him to vary that format of the series, which had been intended to consist solely of plays. The collection included some of Browning's best known poems, such as My Last Duchess, Porphyria's Lover, and The Paid Piper of Hamelin. His next work, The Return of the Dresses, it is a tragedy in blank verse. It is a number four of Bells and Pomegranates. It is written for stage. It is edited by Macready. The action of the play is unhistorical. A blot of the scutcheon. A tragedy written in a blank verse. It is number five, Bells and Pomegranates. A blot of the scutcheon set in an aristocratic household of the 18th century. The play concerns the tragic outcome of an illicit love affair between Mildred Tresham and Lord Henry Merton. Next work, Columbus Birthday. Columbus Birthday is a play in blank verse. It is number 6 of Bells and Pomegranates. The play is set in 17th century Germany on the day that Columbus is to celebrate her birthday and the first anniversary of her accession to the Duchy of Julius and Clues. It The events in it are unhistorical. The next work, dramatic romances and lyrics. It is actually a collection of poems. It is number seventh of Bells and Pomegranates. Many of poems were revised before publication in consultation with Elizabeth Barrett. The collection included some of Browning's best known poems, such as how they brought the good news from Ghent to X, the lost leader, the flight of the Duchess. There is another work by Tennyson which called Luria. It is a tragedy in blank verse which came together with a soul's tragedy. It is number 8 of Bells and Pomegranates. It's set in the 15th century during the conflict between Florence and Pisa. It is the actual episode which is unhistorical. The plot concerns the fall of the noble hearted Florentine commander Luria. Luria is a Moorish mercenary. At the height of his triumph, Luria is falsely accused of plotting a coup against the Republic. The failure of political idealism, consummated and transcended by a heroic death, relates the play to Browning's earlier Sordello. It is acknowledged the influence of Othello. Next work is A Soul's Tragedy. It is a play came together with Lyria. It is number 8 of Bells and Pomegranates. Its subtitle is Act First, being what was called the poetry of Giappino's life, and Act Second, its prose. A Soul's Tragedy is tragic comedy. Next work, The Italian in England, where the bishop orders his tomb at St. Praxed, Pictor Ignotus, Christmas Eve and Yesterday. Christmas Eve and Yesterday was a poem written in two parts. It was written in octosyllabic meter with an irregular rhyme scheme. The first part, Christmas Eve, in the form of a narrative combining realistic and visionary elements. It accepts the denominational religion is an imperfect medium for divine truth, but emphasize the need to choose the best method of worship according to one's light. The second part, Yesterday, which was in the form of an imagined dialogue. It examines the difficulties of holding to the Christian faith at all. It argues that the condition of doubt is essential to the existence of human faith. It is the first to appear after Browning's marriage. It shows the influence of E.B. Browning's strong intellectual and emotional engagement with the religious polemic acting on Browning's own nonconformist upbringing. These next work, Men and Women. It is a collection of 51 poems. The poems date from the period after Browning's marriage in 1846. It includes many of his finest dramatic monologues, such as Fra Lippo Lippi, Bishop Blogram's Apology, Andrea del Sarto, and Cleon. Men and Women also includes Browning's most famous love poem, Love Among the Ruins. Is the problematic child Roland to the Dark Tower came. The title derives from a snatch of song recited by Edgar in King Lear. A knight errant crosses a nightmare landscape in search of the Dark Tower. He eventually reaches the tower and blows his horn defiantly at its foot, and the poem ends with the title phrase. There is no indication of what happened next, and the collection closes with an address to Elizabeth Barrett Browning by the phrase one word more. This phrase picked up during their correspondence in 1845 to 46. Browning also wrote dramatic monologues, such as an epistle containing the strange medical experience of Karshish, the Arab physician, and most of these monologues were written in blank verse. There is a next work by Browning, Dramatis Personae. It is a collection of dramatic monologues. They were marked by Browning's grief at the death of his wife in 1861, his searching examination of the relation of human to divine love. Several of the poems are anthology favorites. Rabbi Ben Ezra and Prospice. The heart of the collection is the long dramatic monologues, such as A Death in the Desert, Caliban upon Setibos, Mr. Sludge, the Medium. Their next work, Apt Vogler. After that, The Ring and the Books. The Ring and the Book is the story of murder of a young wife, Pompilia, by her husband. It is poem in blank verse. It included 12 books. It divided 12 books, totally over 21,000 lines. Published in four monthly installments, November 1868 to February 1869. Next work is Blauschan's Adventure. Its full title is Blauschan's Adventure, including a transcript from Euripides. Next work is Prince Hohenstiel Tachenowago, Savior of Society. It's a poem written in blank verse. In it, the prince is based on the Emperor Napoleon III. Next work is Fifine at the Flare. It is a poem written in Alexandrine couplets. The speaker in this poem is Don Juan. Don Juan, who was attracted by the gypsy dancer Fifine, Fifine, hesitates to Elvire on the nature of his feelings. Here, Fifine represents Lady Ashburton, and Elvire, Elvire, represents Elizabeth Barrett Browning. There is a next work by Browning, Red Cotton Nightcap Country. Its full title is Red Cotton Nightcap Country or Turf and Towers. It is a poem written in blank verse. Title refers ironically to the description by Browning's friend Anne Thackeray. The next work, Aristophanes' Apology, including a transcript from Euripides, being the last adventure of Blauschan. It is a long poem. It is a long poem written in blank verse. It is a sequel to Blauschan Adventure. Next work, the In Album, is a poem. Was written approximately 3,000 lines in blank verse. There was a next work, Pachi Arono, and how he worked in distemper with other poems. It is a collection of 90 poems in various meters. It is the most unusual poem in the volume, the ballad Harvey. This ballad was about the heroic exploit of a French sailor in a fight against the British. There is the next work by Browning, The Agamemnon of Achilles. It is a translation. It aroused controversy because of its uncompromising literalness. His next work, La Saisias and the Two Poets of Puisek. These two are long poems talking about La Saisias is a philosophical elegy. It prompted by the sudden death of a close friend of Browning's with whom he had been holidaying in a chalet called La Saisias. It means the sun near Geneva. Las Isias deals with the central religious question: does the soul survive the body? Is there God's self? No or yes? The poem, like In Memoriam, is as much a self scrutiny as a tribute to the dead. The Two Poets of Crossic tells the stories of two obscure poets associated with the small village of Croisic in Brittany. Each of the stories illustrates in comic and grotesque vein the folly of human aspiration. There is next work, Dramatic Idylls. It is a volume of six poems of medium length, four of them in the same meter. It is also called Dramatic Idylls First Siege. The poems are among the finest of Browning's latter period, Ivanovich. Ivanovich is a story based on a Russian folktale of a woman who threw her children to the walls in order to save her own life. Dramatic Ideals is the collection has notable unity of tones. It focuses on human behavior in conditions of extreme stress. His next work, Dramatic Ideals, second series, which appeared in 1880. Dramatic Ideals second series included a volume of six poems. This is one of the clue. Next work, Yakuseria. It is a volume of 10 poems of various length and meters. Brownings borrowed the title from Otto Melander's book of jokes and stories to suggest its lightweight character. This volume contains the much parodied lyric, Wanting is what? Wanting is what? Wanting is what is an exquisite miniature of Browning's whole philosophy of art as a mode of desire. Is the next work by Browning, Ferishta's Fancies. It is actually a volume of poems. The main part of the collection consists of 12 poems. It focused on the sayings of an imaginary Persian sage, Farishta, on various moral and religious topics. Parleyings with certain people of importance in their day. It is a volume of poems written in blank verse. It is finest of the parleyings Gerardi, Lares, and Charles Evison. The next work, Browning Asolando, which appeared in 1889. It is the last volume of poems. It published on 12th December, the day of Browning's death. The poems fall into three main groups: an opening series of love lyrics, second one, a group of anecdotal poems and longer narratives, and third one, and a concluding group of meditative or reminiscent dramatic monologues. In this volume, the best poem is Beatrice Signorini. Beatrice Signorini is the last of Browning's great poems about Italian painters. There was some prose work written by Browning. He wrote two essays. First one, Chatterton, which wrote in the form of a review. Second one, Shelley, which wrote as the introduction to a collection of letters of Shelley. Next writer, Jonathan Barrett Browning. Short break. After short break, we'll continue. We're going to continue. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, yes, whose timeline is sorry, 1806 to 1861. She began to write poems at the age of 8. She is a woman of acute sensibilities. Her work, The Battle of Marathon, for that, an essay on mind with other poems, is her first published work. For that, Prometheus Bound, The Seraphim and Other Poems. Sonnets from the Portuguese is a sonnet sequence. It was firstly published in 1850. Is the so-called reading edition of 1847 was forgery by T.J. Wise. It describes the growth and development of her love for Robert Browning. Next work, Casa Guidi Windows. Uh, it has the theme of Italian liberation. Work, Aurora Lay. Aurora Lay is an immense poem in blank verse. It is a novel in verse published 1857. It wrote in 11,000 lines. It has the life story of a woman writer. It is magnum opus. The next work, Last Poems. It issued posthumously in 1862. It contained some of her best known lyrics. Next work, The Cry of the Children, which published in Blackwood magazine. After that, Musical Instrument published in Cornhill magazine. Next, greatest writer, Matthew Arnold, whose timeline is between 1822 to 1888. He is a poet and critic. He is the son of famous headmaster of rugby school, Thomas Arnold. He gained the Newdigate Prize for Poetry. He is a fellow of Oriel College. He is the inspector of schools. His first volume of poem, The Strayed Reveler and Other Poems. In this volume, we find the poems The Forsaken Merman, The Sick King in Bokhara, and sonnets written at Balliol, including Shakespeare. His work, Empedocles on Etna, and other poems. Empedocles on Etna is a dramatic poem. It was published anonymously in 1852. In this poem, Arnold portrays the philosopher Empedocles, who committed suicide by throwing himself into the crater of Etna. For that, next work, Tristram and Ulf, is a poem in three parts. This is the first modern version of the story that was made familiar by Wagner and Tennyson. It deals with the death of Tristram. Next work is Sora and Rustum is a poem. The story is taken from Firdusi's Persian epic. It was written in blank verse, adorned by epic similes. There was another work, Poems, is a preface. Next work, New Poems, that the Scholar Gypsy. Scholar Gypsy is a poem. It has pastoral in setting. It based on an old legend narrated by Glanville in his The Vanity of Dogmatizing. The tone is elegiac. His next work, Thyresis, is a actually monody. It is to commemorate the author's friend Arthur Hughes Claw, who died at Florence in 1861. It was firstly published in Macmillan's magazine in 1866. It is a pastoral elegy. Laments Claw as Thyresis. It recalling his golden prime in the days when he and Arnold wandered through the Oxfordshire countryside. It is their youthful rivalry as poets. Claw's departure for a more troubled world is described here. Heresis invokes the scholar gypsy as an image of hope and perpetual quest. His work, Rugby Chapel, that on translating Homer. There are some meditative poetry done by Arnold. First one is Dover Beach. After that, A Summer Night. Essays in Criticism contains the best of his critical work. First series published in 1865, second series in 1888. So that on the study of Celtic literature. Next, the Culture and Anarchy, which appeared in 1869, is a collection of essays, contains many of Arnold's central critical arguments. The first chapter is devoted to his concept of culture as sweetness and light. The phrase sweetness and light, adopted from Jonathan Swift's The Battle of the Books. In Culture and Anarchy, Arnold presents culture as the classical ideal of human perfection. Subsequent chapters set forward his definitions of barbarians, Philistines, and populace. The is the contrast of spirit of Hebraism with that of Hellenism. Next work, Literature and Dogma. So that next work is Edward Fitzgerald. Yes, who is the next writer. His lifetime is between 1809 to 1888. Edward Fitzgerald was the Tennyson's closest friend. He wrote the literary work Rubaiyat. Actually, it is a free translation of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat. Next prose work is the Euphranor, a dialogue on youth. It is a prose dialogue. That next literary personality is Arthur Hughes Clough. Goss says Clough's poetry is the sympathetic modern accent. First literary work by Clough is the Bothi of Topor na Fuosich. Is the first long poem by Clough. Wrote in classical hexameter, Arnold says that the poem had freshness, life, naturalness, the true Homeric ring. There is the next work, Amos de Voyage, which wrote in hexameters, firstly published in the Atlantic Monthly 1858. Wrote, it is in epistolary form actually. After that, the next work, Ipsichus, the meditative poem. Next work is Say Not the Struggle Not Availeth. And his death was bewailed by Arnold in his elegy, Harrisis. Is the next writer, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, whose lifetime is between 1807 to 1882. He is an American poet. Longfellow is the classmate of Hawthorne, Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is the American writer actually. His first work is Outremer. Next one, A Pilgrimage Beyond the Sea, is based upon his earliest travels. The Hyperion is a prose romance. It is a product of his grief, and it is the tale of a young man who seeks to forget sorrow in travel. Next work is Voices of the Night, is a collection. It includes some of his shorter poems. Next work is Ballads and Other Poems, and in it we find well-known pieces such as The Wreck of the Hesperus and The Village Blacksmith. Next work is Evangeline. Evangeline is a tragical story of the early colonial days. It wrote in hexameters, set in Acadia. Next work is The Song of Hiawatha. It is a collection of Indian folk tales. It wrote in unrhymed octosyllabic verse. Next work, The Courtship of Miles Standish. It wrote in long hexameter narrative. It was based on a New England legend. The next work tells of a wayside inn. It follows the form of the Canterbury Tales and the Decameron. It is a group of travelers in the old-fashioned quaint abode of the inn, pass the evening by telling tales directed by the landlord. There are some didactic pieces created by Arnold. That's one, a psalm of life, footsteps of angels, the reaper and the follower. Next writer is Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and he is also called D.G. Rossetti. Lifetime is between 1828 to 1882. Was painter as well as poet. He founded the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood School, in which we find it is a group of artists, poets, and critics. Here are some poets such as John Millais, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, William Holman Hunt, William Michael Rossetti, T. Ulner, Frederick George Stephens, and James Collinson. The aim of this school is to replace the reigning academic style of painting by a returning to the truthfulness, simplicity, and spirit of devotion which they were attributed to Italian painting before the time of Raphael and the High Italian Renaissance. The term Pre-Raphaelite indicated inspiration from Italian artists before Raphael, and its periodical was the Germ, GRM Germ. October 1871 appeared Robert Bushnell's notorious attack, The Fleshy School of Poetry. In the Contemporary Review, it is Rossetti's reply, The Stealthy School of Criticism, appeared in the Athenaeum December 1872. After that, there was a collection of poems, for example, Sister Helen, Troy, Traun, Eden, Boer, Jenny, and the first part of his sonnet sequence, The House of Life. There was another work, Ballads and Sonnets. After that, The Blessed Damosel. The Blessed Damosel is the first version appeared in the German. Describes the blessed damosel leading out from the rampart of heaven, watching the worlds below and the souls mounting to God, and praying for union with her earthly lover in the shadow of the living mystic tree. It shows pre-Raphaelite interest in medieval sacramental symbolism and Rossetti's concept of an ideal platonic love. Then another work, My Sister's Sleep is another work. After that, Hand and Soul is a prose piece, and it was published in the German 1850. Some ballads are there, for example, Rosemary and Troy Town. Next one is Christiana Georgia Rossetti. She is the sister of Dante Gabriel and William Michael Rossetti, and on her there was written biography by L.M. Packer. Rossetti was contributed to the Germ, where five of her poems appeared under the pseudonym Ellen Allen. Some works such as Uphill, to that Birthday and A Birthday. Both two of her best known poems actually, and both were published in Macmillan's magazine. So there's Goblin Market and other poems. To that, The Prince Progress and other poems. Sing Song, a nursery rhyme book, which was published with illustrations by Arthur Hughes. Then Pigeon and other poems. Then Time Flies, reading diary, which consists of short passages and prose, one for each day of the year, the verses and new poems. There is the next writer, William Morris, whose lifetime is between 1834 to 1896. He was one of the originators of the Oxford and Cambridge magazine in 1856. And the Anti-Scrap Society was founded by William Morris in 1877. This society was for the protection of ancient buildings. There is Morris's first work, The Defense of Genevieve and other poems which appeared in 1858. It contains much of his best work, such as the hashtag in the floods, concerning concerning Jeffrey Teste Noire, Shameful Death, Golden Wings. These are important works. So that next work is The Life and Death of Jason, which is a heroic poem wrote in heroic couplets. It based on the story of Jason, Medea, and the Argonauts. The next work, The Earthly Paradise, is a poem, a collection of tales, consists of a prologue and 24 tales, which wrote in Chaucerian meters. Next work is The Story of Sigurd and the Volsung and the Fall of the Nibelungs. It is a finest long narrative poem. It is based on the Norse sagas. It is an epic in anapaestic couplets, wrote in 4 books. Next work, Poems by the Way. After that, Hopes and Fears for Art. Next one, Science of Change. Lectures are there. First one, A Dream of John Ball. It is a historical socialist fantasy published in Commonweal, November 1886 to January 1887. In volume from 1888, we find that it takes the form of a dream. In it, the narrator is carried back to the time of the early stages of the peasants' revolt in 1381. He encounters the hedge priest John Ball, and in their final night long dialogue, Maurice Booth satirizes the 19th century present and offers hope for a future when men shall see things as they verily are and rise in successful protests against their exploitation. The next picture, News from Nowhere. It is a utopian socialist fantasy, and is it firstly published in Commonweal, January to October 1890, in volume form 1891. It is a critical response to Bellamy's Looking Backward, which is a utopian portrait of a state socialist future dominated by machinery. It is his socialist political hopes for the regeneration of English life. After that, there are some prose romances such as A Tale of the House of the Wolfing, The Roots of the Mountains, The Story of the Glittering Plain, The Wood Beyond the World, The Sundering Flood. That next writer is Algernon Charles Swinburne, who is also called A.C. Swinburne, whose lifetime is between 1837 to 1909. Uh, Here from his first literary work, Atlanta in Caledon, which appeared in 1865. It was written in English version of an ancient Greek tragedy with choruses. It was in poetic form. It is a poetic drama. And Michael Rossetti compared Atlanta in Caledon to Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. The next work by Swinburne, Poems and Ballads, contains many of his best as well as his most notorious poems, such as Dolores, Talus, Hymn to Prosper Pine, The Triumph of Time, Faustine, Los Veneris. The next work, Songs Before Sunrise. It is a collection of poems chiefly in praise of Italian beauty. And the next work, Irech Theos. So it is a Greek drama. Next work, Tristram and Other Poems, which wrote in heroic couplet. It tells the story of Tristram's love for Queen Iseult, marriage to Iseult of Brittany, and his death. Next work, The Queen, Mother, and Rosamond, is a play. It shows the influence of Elizabethan dramatists, notably of Chapman. The next work, A Song of Italy, Songs Before Sunrise. Lard is the first of 3 dramas on the subject of Mary Queen of Scots. Next literary work is Bothwell, Mary Stuart, Mary Stuart, which was written on the uh, subject of Mary Queens of Scott. So that Locrine sisters, Mary No Falerio, which is a tragedy on the same subject as Byron's of the same title. So that Poems and Ballads, third series. There are some critical works such as William Blake, Study of Shakespeare, Study of Ben Jonson. The next writer is Arthur Edgar O'Shaughnessy, whose lifetime is between 1844 to 1881. There are some works by Shaughnessy, such as An Epic of Women and Other Poems, Lays of France, Music and Moonlight, Songs of a Worker. After that, We Are the Music Makers, which is Ode, Neglected Heart, Exile. The next writer, Walt Whitman, who is actually American writer and whose lifetime is between 1819 to 1892. He is a printer, school teacher, journalist, and publisher. First greatest work, which title is Leaves of Grass. Its first edition contained 12 poems, uh, verse libre. So that next work is Drum Taps. So that there is his prose work, Memoranda during the war. Another work, When Lilacus Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, is the Great Elegy on Abraham Lincoln by Whitman. So, talking about the Victorian era in which development of novel was happen. So, we will talk about. So, the Victorian era, there were novelists such as Charles Dickens. We must discuss about them, about him. His full name is Charles John Ham Dickens. His lifetime is between 1812 to 18 was work Master Humphrey's Clock. Quickly was founded by Dickens 1840. Is another one that it was originally intended as a miscellany which would contain continuous narrative linked by the reminiscence of the narrator Master Humphrey. That the Daily News, the New Radical paper, was also founded by Charles Dickens in 1845. It is a liberal rival to the Morning Chronicle. It is the first issue appeared on 21st January 1846. Especially Dickens himself edited the paper, the news. Notable in it, Dickens is a notable contributor. Other contributors and members of its staff at various times. Personalities Martineau, Lang, D.B. Shaw, Wells, Arnold Bennett, eminent war correspondent Archibald Forbes. Why it became the News Chronicle in he survived under the title still 1960. Is another one. Household Words weekly periodical started in 1950. It was incorporated in 1959 to all the year round, which he edited until his death, aimed at a large audience. Contributions from well-known writers as Mr. Pascal and Bulwer Lytton was established. The reputation of Wilkie Collins published poems by young Meredith and Patmore, attacks on the abuses of the day, poor sanitation, slums, factory, and it matter was varied and entertaining, activated a vast readership. So the another work, Sketches by Boch, is a series dealing with London life in the manner of Leigh Hunt. It's a collection of Sketches of Life and Manners is the monthly magazine. Next work, the Pickwick Papers, that Oliver Twist is one of the best work, which appeared in Bentley's Miscellany. Here, Dickens was the first editor, begun by Bentley's Miscellany was begun by Richard Bentley. His other work, Nicholas Nickleby, Old Curiosity Shop. It was published as a separate volume in 1848-41. It originally intended to be fitted to the framework of Master Humphrey's clock. Master Humphrey is the narrator of the first few chapters. Idea was soon abandoned. Next work, Parmai Raj, is actually historical novel published as part of Master Humphrey clock. The earlier of Dickens' two historical novels set at the period of the Gordon anti-popery riots of 1780. We find Lord George Gordon himself appears character. The other work, American Notes, Martin Chuzzlewit, Life and Adventures of Martin Chuzzlewit, Christmas Carol, Christmas book, the first of a series of Christmas books are there. Themes it on death, battle of life, and work Dombanson, dealing with the firm of Dombanson, working with Copperfield, started in 1849. Masterpiece this David Copperfield is of all my books, I like this the best. He has always been popular among Dick is Dickens' well autobiography. Dick House contains vigorous satire on the abuses of the old court of chancery, the delays and cost of which brought misery and ruin on its citizens, centers in the fortunes of an uninterested Richard Carston, a futile youth, amiable Hackler, are wards of the court in the Paradise. Child's is learn work which manifests own history. Hugh, Alfred and Croft work appeared irregularly in 51. Next work, Our Times in 54, condemned by Macaulay for its Sullivan socialism, and Davis, who saw Dickens in this work for once possessed by a comprehensive vision. Next work, Little Dorrit, was published in monthly parts 1855 to 57. G.B. Shaw says Little Dorrit, the masterpiece among many masterpieces. Work, a take of two cities. Two cities are Paris, time of the French Revolution, London, means Paris and London. A tale of two cities, not take of. Next work is the book gives a vivid picture from French Revolution. A Tale of Two Cities is model on Carlyle's The French Revolution. The next work, Great Expectations, which first appeared in all the year round 1861, 60 to 61. Published in book form in the latter year. It recounts the development of the character of the narrator, Philip Pirip, commonly known as Pip. It is a village boy. Village boy is there, brought up by his Termagant sister, the wife of the gentle, humorous, kindly blacksmith, Joey Gregory. For that, all the year round is next work. For that, Our Mutual Friend, which published in monthly parts between May 1864 and November 1885. There is The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which was incomplete. The next writer, William Mcpeace Thackeray, whose lifetime is between 1811 to 1863. He was born in Calcutta, was the son of Rochmond Thackeray. Rochmond Thackeray actually was a character in the East India Company's service. Thackeray's father died when he was 3. Thackeray was sent home to England in 1817. Thackeray was a close friend of Fitzgerald. There was his periodical, which name was Punch. Subtitle was the London Cherry. It is an illustrated weekly comic periodical by Thackeray. It was founded in 41. It contributed to it caricatures as well as articles and humorous sketches. Contribute regularly to Fraser's magazine that it wrote for many other periodicals, including the Morning Chronicle, the New Monthly Magazine, and the Times. Next work, the Yellow Plush Correspondence, is contributed to Fraser's magazine. These were a critique of what Carlyle called Pluckism, delivered through the device of a footman narrator. Another work, Catherine, narrated by E.K. Solomon, published serially in Fraser's magazine, 1839 to 40. Next work, A Shabby Gentle Story. After that, the Paris Sketchbook. The Paris Sketchbook is his first full-length volume. Contains miscellaneous early journalism. After that, the great Hogarty Diamond, great Hogarty Diamond, mock heroic tale. Diamond, which brings bad luck to Samuel Titmarsh, who is an amiable young clerk who inherits the gem. Then it's narrated by Sam Coggins, whose name is Michael Angelo Titmarsh. Angelo Titmarsh provided Thackeray with his most familiar pseudonym, the Fitzbudel Papers, which appeared first in Fraser's magazine. Men's Wives included 184 stories appeared in Fraser's magazine. They are concerned with different kinds of unhappy marriage and the exploitation of one partner by other. The longest and most fully developed story, the Raven Swing, is there. The Raven Swing, which concerns Morgiana Crump, who possesses beautiful hair and a beautiful singing voice, marries the profligate Captain Walker and supports him by singing. The work, The Luck of Barry London. It is a satirical historical novel published in Fraser's magazine. He republished another title, The Memoirs of Barry London, Esquire, by himself. Uh, is the picaresque story of an Irish adventurer who unconsciously reveals his villainy while attempting self justification. The next book, The Irish Sketchbook of 1843. It is a personal, impressionistic, and prejudiced account of an 1842 tour of Ireland. Next work is The Book of Snopes. The Book of Snopes is there. The subtitle is The Snopes of England by one of themselves. It appeared in Punch as The Snopes of England. Was narrated by Mr. Snope. The work is the Punch Prize novelist. Paradise the leading writers of the day. This work, The History of Samuel Titmarsh, Great Hogarty Diamond, at Vanity Fair, his first major novel. Story of Vanity Fair is set time of the Napoleonic Wars. Hughes, a satirical picture of a worldly society. The title is taken from Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, a fair in the town of Vanity on the way to the celestial work. History of Pendennis, serialized in numbers, November 1848 to December 1850, illustrated by himself. publication was interrupted by the serious illness of its author, who fell ill with cholera in 1849. His Buildings Roman novel. The work, The History of Henry Esmond, historical novel by Thackeray, set during the reign of Queen Anne. Esmond is the major character in this novel. He tells his own story, mainly in the third person. Find he is the son of the third Viscount Castlewood, who dies at the Battle of the Boyne. The latter history of the family in America and England is told in the Virginias. Comes his next work, which was edited by Pendennis. After that, the Virginias is the sequel to Henry Esmond, the historical novel of the American Revolution. Here we find in 1860 appointed first editor of the Cornhill magazine. For this, Thackeray wrote Lowell the Windower. Next work, The Adventure of Philip. Its full title is The Adventures of Philip on his way through the world, showing who robbed him, who helped him, and who passed him by. The last complete novel, serialized in the Cornhill magazine, January 1861 to August 1862, with illustrations by the author and Fred Walker. It was serialized. The story in it, the story is told by Arthur. Is another work, The Roundabout Papers. It is a series of essays. Dennis Duval. It is unfinished novel. Yes. Lectures also. First one, the English humorist of the 18th century. There are the four Hughes. It we find Rebecca and the Rowena is a comic continuation of Ivanhoe. After that, The Legend of the Hind is a burlesque tale of medieval chivalry. The Rose and the Ring is an excellent example of his love of parody. The fairy story. It illustrated by Thackeray, first published 1855. It is also illustrated, yes, there by Mr. M. A. Titmarsh. This is there. Delightful children's story. Poetry also there. Is we find the ballads of Policeman X, which contributed to Punch. That the White Squall, the ballad of Paula Bessie, major sisters, grand sisters, so called the Bronte sisters. First one is Charles Bronte, Emily Bronte, Anne Bronte. First, talking about Charles Bronte, whose lifetime is between 1860 to 1855. 1816 to 1855. Wrote first work, The Professor, which appeared in 1857 after her death. Is her first novel. That Jane Eyre, which came in 1847, is the greatest novel by Bronte, Scarlet Bronte. After that, the story of the first Mrs. Rochester was told by Rice in Wide Sargasso Sea. Scarlet's next work is Shirley, which appeared in 1849. The scene of the story is situated in Yorkshire, period the latter part of the Napoleonic Wars, the time of the Ludite riots, when the wool industry was suffering from the almost complete cessations of exports. Next work is Billet, appeared in 1853. Find Elizabeth Gaskell, the biography on the life of Charlotte Bronte, appeared in 1857. Next sister, second one, whose name is Emily Bronte, whose full name is Emily Jane Bronte. Her lifetime was 1880 to 1848. She wrote a grand work, Wuthering Height, which came in 1847. The story is narrated by Lockwood. And here the narration is taken up by housekeeper Nelly Dean. Events set in motion by the arrival at the heights of Heathcliff are picked up as a waif of unknown parentage in the streets of Liverpool by the elder Earnshaw. There are some finest poems composed by Emily Bronte, such as "No coward soul is mine, hold in the hold in the earth and the deep snow piled above thee." Last one sister is Anne Bronte, whose lifetime was between 1820 to 1849. He wrote some grand works such as Agnes Grace and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. To George Eliot, lifetime is 1890 to 1880. She is actually the personality is a woman, and but in that era there was not permission to write women. That's why personality gained the name George Eliot, male name. Yes, actually, personality's major name is the base name is Mary Ann Evans. Yes, EVS praises her traditional moral sensibility, her luminous intelligence. EVS says she she is not as transcendently great as Tolstoy, but she's great and great in the same. So Rosemary Aston wrote the book on George Eliot, which title is George Eliot: A Life, paid in 1996. Eliot's first work is Life of Jesus. Is a translation Strauss. 1851, Eliot became assistant editor of the Westminster Review. So that we transla- made translation of Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity. So that Eliot's first work, Scenes of Clerical Life, is a collection of short stories. It is a series of three tales. It published in two volumes, 1858. It appeared in Blackwood's magazine in the previous year. Find there is one short story, The Sad Fortunes of the Rue, Amos Barton, The Sketch of the Commonplace Clergyman. Another short story is Mr. Ilfield's Love Story, tale of a man whose nature has been warped by a tragic love experience. The short story is there. Janet's Repentance. It is the story of a conflict between religion and irreligion and of the influence of a sympathetic human soul. There is another work by Eliot, Adam Bede, which appeared in 1859. The plot was suggested by a story told to George Eliot by her Methodist aunt Elizabeth Evans of a confession of child murder made to her by a girl in prison. The action takes place close of the 18th century. Etty Sorrell, the most successful of George Eliot's female figures. There is another writer, the work by George Eliot, Mill and the Floss. Find in it Tom and Maggie are principal and major characters. We find portrayal of childhood, rural life, especially the attraction of this novel, one of the most widely read of her works. So said is a partly autobiographical novel, poetical man. Work by Eliot is Silas Marner, The Vicar of Ravelloy, short novel by Eliot. Hughes, excellent pictures of village life. It has melodramatic end. Work is Romola. Romola is one of the best novel. Background of this novel is Florence at the end of the 15th century, troubled period following the expulsion of the Medici of the expedition of Charles VIII. The story is that of the purification by trials of the noble-natured Romola, devoted daughter of an old blind scholar. In the work, Felix Holt the Radical. It's set in the period of the Reform Bill, set in 1832 in Loamshire. It evokes political ferment and corrupt electioneering tactics of the times. Work is Middlemarch. Yes, Middlemarch. A study of provincial life. Scene is laid in the provincial town of Middlemarch, Loamshire, during the years of the agitation immediately preceding the first Reform Bill. George Eliot's reputation reached its height with Middlemarch. Virginia Woolf defended her in an essay which declared Middlemarch to be one of the few English novels written for grown up people. Next work, Daniel Deronda, the last novel, has Jewish plot. Next work is Impressions of Theophrastus Such, a collection of miscellaneous essays. Next work is Spanish Gypsy, is Eliot's dramatic poem conceived on an earlier visit to Italy. It was inspired by Tintoretto. Next writer, George Meredith. So we will. So next writer is George Meredith, whose lifetime is between 1828 to 1909. And in 1867, he was become temporary editor of the Fortnightly Review. Yes, he also the literary work poems. After that, the literary work Modern Love and Poems of the English Roadside with poems and ballads. It is an intense, innovative work of 50 poems, each of 16 lines. It was spoken by a narrator who painfully discovers how unreal are his ideas of women. Another work, Poems and Lyrics of the Joy of the Earth. After that, ballads and poems of tragic life, reading of earth, poems, a reading of life with other poems. There's some novels also written by Meredith. Yes, first one is The Ordeal of Richard Feveril is the first novel. It exhibits clearly for the first time his theory of comedy. After that, Evan Harrington, which details of Meredith's own family life. Emilia in England, Voda Fleming, Victoria is a sequel to Sandra Belloni. The Adventures of the Harry Richmond begin as an autobiographical study. After that, Beauchamp's career is a political novel. It was much concerned with the contemporary state of Britain. There is a character Neville Beauchamp who begins his career as an idealistic young naval officer. Rennie was a Meredith's favorite among all his women characters. Another work, The Egoist. The central character, the egoist himself, is Sir Willoughby by Patterne in this work. That the tragic comedians is a novella. It was based on an episode in the life of the German socialist Ferdinand Lassalle. That Diana of the Crossways is a work. Diana is based on the writer Caroline Norton, whose husband had tried to divorce her. But the family's protest, Meredith included a note that the work is to be read fiction. Crossways, the name of her house, indicates the novel's emphasis on a historical moment which proved a turning point in marital politics. There is another work, yes, Meredith, another work, One of Our Conquerors, the Lord Ormond and his Aminta. It is a Ormond and his Aminta is another study of unhappy marriage. It has an exotic setting and a more aristocratic milieu than normal in Meredith's work. Another work, The Amazing Marriage, is his last novel. It is his most impenetrable work. It is extreme exploration, and it shows extreme exploration of the battle between the sexes. The next writer, Benjamin Disraeli, lifetime was between 1804 to 1881. Was first Earl of Beaconsfield. He was politician, prime minister, novelist. Himself, famous comment was, "When I want to read a novel, I write one." There is a work, Vivian Grey. Yes, Vivian Grey was the first of Disraeli's novels. It was published anonymously. Next work, The Voyage of Captain Openilla. Yes, it is also called Modern Gulliver's Travels. After that, Contarini Fleming, a psychological autobiography, is Oriental historical romance. Henrietta Temple, Konigsby or the Two Generations, Sibyl or the Two Nations, Tancred or the New Crusade, Ixion in Heaven, The Infernal Marriage, uh, both Ixion in Heaven and The Infernal Marriage, published in the New Monthly 1829-1830, and in the book form, actually it was published in the book form 1853. The light political satire. There is another work, The Wondrous Tale of Alroy and the Rise of the Iskander. There is a next writer, Edward Bulwer Lytton. He wrote is the first novel, Falkland, Pelham or the Adventures of a Gentleman. Paul Clifford also wrote historical novels such as The Last Days of Pompeii, Rienzi, the last of the Roman tribunes, Harold, the last of the Saxons. After that, there were some domestic novels as the Caxtons, a family picture, my novel. After that, terror and supernatural novels books were there. A strange story, the coming race days were also there. Richelieu or the conspiracy and money. Next writer, Carlos Reed. His first work, Mask and Faces, were written with the collaboration, yes, with Tom Taylor. Mm, Peg Woffington. Yes, Peg Woffington was Reed's first novel. Chris Johnstone. Next work is It Is Never Too Late to Mend. The Cloister and the Herat was one of the best novel by Charles Reed. That Hard and Cash, which attacks upon private lunatic asylum. That Griffith Gaunt or Jealousy, Foul Play. The next writer is Anthony Trollope. Anthony Trollope edited the Paul's magazine. Yes. His work is there. The Kills and the O'Kills, the Warden, Barchester Towers. After that, Dr. Thorne, Framley Personage, The Small House at Ellington, The Last Chronicle of Barres, which is best novel. Some political novels also written by Anthony Trollope. Yeah, Trollope's political novels are called Palliser novels. Yes, such as Can You Forgive Her, Phineas Finn, Phineas Redux, the Eustace Diamonds, the Prime Minister, the Duke's Children, autobiography. But that Wilkie Collins is there, another writer whose lifetime is between 1824 to 1889, and he was the most successful of the followers of Dickens. He was specialized in the mystery novel. He wrote more than 25 novels, such as The Dead Secret, The Women in White, No Name, The Moonstone, which is one of the earliest and the best of the great multitude of detective stories. Was next work, After Park, is a collection of some of his best pieces. Next writer is Charles Kingsley. Yes, talking about Kingsley, he was a social reformer. He wrote literary work such as Alton Locke Taylor and the Poet. This one is a problem, which firstly serialized in Fraser's magazine in 1848. It published in book form in 1851. At Hypatia or New Hose with an old face, Westward Ho, which is a tale of the good old days of Queen Elizabeth, inspired by an upsurge of patriotism with which he greeted the Crimean War. It was set in the Elizabethan period. Next work, 2 years ago, Hereward the Wake, last of the English, is a historical novel. It was based on the exploits of the legendary outlaw. There were some poems also there. Sands of D, The Three Fishes, earlier become the Saints tragedy, which is a poetical drama. The Heroes is a semi-poetical prose. The Water Babies. The next writer, Walter Besant. Besant was written the literary works such as Ready Money, Morty Boy, The Golden Butterfly, which was written along with James Rice. After that, next writer, George Borrow is there, who wrote The Bible in Spain, which tells his adventures as an agent of the Bible Society. Lavangro, The Romney Rye, which deals with the life of gypsies, uh, Wild Wells. There is a next writer, Nathaniel Hawthorne. He is actually American novelist and most famous novelist. He was not only moralist but also allegorist. Yes, he wrote short stories such as Twice Told Tales and Twice Told Tales second series. He wrote novels also. First one, Moses from an Old Man Say. That the Scarlet Letter is one of the famous work by Hawthorne. Scarlet Letter is a classic inquiry into the nature of American Puritanism and the New England conscience. The scene of the story is the Puritan New England of the 17th century. It is an aged English scholar has sent his young wife, whose name is Hester Prynne, and Hester Prynne was sent to Boston intending to follow her, but she has been captured by the Indians and delayed for 2 years. Yes, and he arrives to find her in the pillory with a baby in her arms. She has refused to name her lover and has been sentenced, most important word is sentenced to this ordeal and to wear for the remainder of her life the red letter A. A means adulterousness on her bosom. The husband assumes the name of Roger Chillingworth and makes Hester swear that she will conceal his identity. Hester goes to live on the outskirts of the town, an object of contempt and insult with her child Pearl. Uh, Hester's lover is Arthur Dimmesdale, who is a young and highly revered minister. There is another work by Hawthorne, The House of the Seven Gables, which is a study in ancestral guilt and expiation, who, sorry, also deeply rooted in New England and his own family. Next work by Hawthorne is the Blithedale Romance. Blithedale Romance is a novel which conveys his mixed response to the transcendentalists. Transcendentalists is a group of American intellectuals who met informally for philosophical discussion at Emerson's house and elsewhere during some years from 1836. Uh, the embodiment of transcendentalism means this movement of thought, philosophical, religious, social, and economic, produced in New England between 1830 and 1850 by the spirit of revolutionary Europe, German philosophy, and Wordsworth, Coleridge, Carlyle. The philosophical view of this transcendentalism may be gathered from Emerson's short treatise, Nature. Its literary organ was the dial. The next writer, Richard Blackmore, he wrote Lorna Doone, which is a historical romance of Exmoor. After that, The Maid of Scare, Cripps the Carrier. Robert Louis Stevenson, R.L. Stevenson, whose work is An Inland Voyage. It describes a canoe tour in Belgium and France. After that, travels with a donkey in the Cavendish, which is the description of a tour taken with his donkey Modestine. After that, Virginibus, Pyrrhus, so romances, the New Arabian Nights, Treasure Island. Treasure Island previously appeared in Young Fox between July 81 to July 82. It was appeared under the title The Sea Cook or Treasure Island. On the work The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a terror mystery novel. There are some historical novels are there, such as Kidnapped, The Black Arrow, The Master of Ballantrae, Catriona. Catriona is the sequel of Kidnap actually. The Wear of Hermiston is an incomplete work. Next, poetry also written by him, such as A Child Garden of Verses, Underwoods, and this next writer, whose name is Francis Bret Harte, he was become editor in 1868. uh, Monthly work, the Overland Monthly. Yes, wrote stories such as The Luck of Roaring Camp, The Outcast of Poker Flat, Meagles, Tennessee's Partner, Plain Language from Truthful Gems. Yes, it is most popular verse piece actually. Next writer is Mark Twain, uh, American writer, and his original name is Samuel Langhorne Clemens. He wrote travel books such as The Innocents Abroad. It is a satirical account of a voyage through the Mediterranean. The Saturday Review says that Mark Twain is a very offensive specimen of the vulgarest kind of Yankee. Next work, Roughing It, is an account of his adventures as miner and a journalist in Nevada. Next one, A Tramp Abroad, following the equator. After that, there are some novels of the Mississippi, such as The Adventures of the Tom Sawyer, or The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is the greatest work. Yes, one of the great work of American fiction is an adventure story. It is a profound moral commentary on the nature of the American experience and the institution of slavery. Work Life on the Mississippi. It is an autobiographical account of his life. River Pilot contains a notable attack on the influence of Sir Walter Scott. Some romances also there. The Prince and the Pauper is his democratic historical fantasy. We find the background of England pictured in it. Next work is A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It is the disturbing and not wholly or entirely amiable fantasy that satirizes both past and present. Last work, Joan of Arc. Next writer, Mrs. Elizabeth Leghorn Gaskell. Wrote work Mary Barton, A Tale of Manchester Life. The background of the story is Manchester in the Hungry 40s. Next work is North and South. It was published serially in Household Words in 1854 to 55. The next, a study of the contrast between the values, habits of rural southern England and industrial northern England. There is another work by Gaskell, Sylvia's Lover, a moralistic story in domestic setting. After that, Wives and Daughters. There we find ironical study of snobbishness. After that, Cranford. Cranford is a series of linked sketches of life among the ladies of a quite country village in the 1830. Cranford, based on Knutsford in Cheshire, where Mrs. Gaskell spent her childhood. Work Ruth. There, Ruth, Mrs. Gaskell's purpose in this novel was to arouse more sympathy for fallen women who had been unprotected victims of seduction, but she shocked many contemporary readers. Another work, Ludlow, Jim Phillips, Charlotte Bronte's biography. And the prose work in this era, talking about the prose work in this era, we find uh, Thomas Carlyle, whose lifetime is between 1795 to 1881. He was a social prophet and critic, and his prestige as historian. W. Yeats wrote in his autobiography that Carlyle is the chief inspirer of self-educated men in the 80s and early 90s. There is the work by Carlyle, translation of Goethe's Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship. The next work, The Life of Schiller, which appeared in the London Magazine in 1823-4. It's separately published in 1825. There are Sartre's is there, the life and opinions of the hair. Few Fels Dorok. After that, Carlyle also wrote historical novels. The French Revolution, which appeared in 1837, wrote in three volumes. First one, the Bastille; second, the Constitution; third, the Guillotine. French Revolution was greatly admired by Charles Dickens. It was in part the inspiration of A Tale of Two Cities, for that Oliver Cromwell's letters and speeches. Uh, Next, Life of John Sterling. Next, the history of Frederick II of Prussia, called Frederick the Great. Next work by Carlyle, works dealing with contemporary events such as Chartism, past and present, latter day pamphlets. There is one of the great work by Thomas Carlyle on hero worship and the heroic in history, which appeared in 1841. Actually, it is a series of lectures which he delivered in 1837. It's a course of six lecture. Uh, First one is the hero as divinity. For example, Odin, the type Norseman. Second, the hero as prophet. Example, Muhammad. Third, the hero as poet. Example, Dante and Shakespeare. Fourth one, the hero as priest. Example, Luther, Knox. Fifth one, the hero as man of letters. For example, Dr. Johnson, Rousseau, Burns. Last one is the hero as king, Cromwell, Napoleon. Next writer is Thomas Babington Macaulay, who is specially known in the history of English literature. Macaulay, whose lifetime was between 1800 to 1859. He was a politician as well as historian. He wrote Lays of Ancient Rome, which is a collection of poems. Next work was Essay Critical and Historical. Pattern was called work A Key to Halve the Prejudices of Our Age. After that, the next work, History of England. It was actually first two volumes were published in 1849. It was unfinished. There is a next writer, John Ruskin, uh, who is one of the important writer. uh, his lifetime was between 1819 to 1900. Yes, he wrote literary work, modern painters. Longest work was his first volume issued in 1843. Fifth and last in there was his another work, The Seven Lamps of Architecture, which is shorter and most popular. Next one, The Stones of Venice, written in three volumes. It is a masterpiece. The first in 1851, the second and third in 1853, published. In it, we find an architecture study in which immense original scholarship is put to moralistic use. The two path course of lecture find unto this last series of articles on political economy appeared in the Cornhill magazine. After that, Munera Pulvers, the unfinished series of articles on political economy. It also published Fraser's magazine. After that, Sesame and Lily, course of two lectures, The Crown of Wild Olive, series of addresses, Praterita, which began in 1885, the kind of spiritual autobiography. Next writer is Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose lifetime is between 1803 to 1882. He was American philosopher as well as poet. He was editor of The Dial from 1842 to 1844. The Dial was founded in 1840. The literary organ, the Dial was called the literary organ of an American transcendental movement. That is Ralph Waldo Emerson. And also we find he also got the new quasi-religious concept of transcendentalism, found written expression in his essay Nature. And There are 11 volumes of lectures and essays. First volume of essay contains self-reliance. Second essays contains the poet representative representative men. In 1845, Emerson delivered the lectures that are published in 1850. His studies of Plato, Swedenborg, Napoleon, and others owe something to Carlyle's concept of the hero. There is another writer, John Addington Symonds. He attracted by the Hellenism of the Renaissance. His prose and poetry are colored by his concept of Platonic love and his admiration for male beauty. There is his work, Studies of Greek Poets, the Renaissance in Italy, which is the longest work and most Picaresque work is there. Next writer is Walter Horatio Pater, most important writer. Lifetime is 1832 to 1904. Was stylish as well as poetic. Was the pioneer of art for art sake. This concept, art for art's sake, it's a phrase associated with the aesthetic doctrine that art is self-sufficient and need serve no moral or political purpose. The phrase of art for art's sake became current in France in the first half of the 19th century. Gautier's formulation, it is the Gautier's formulation in his preface to Mademoiselle de Maupin, which denied that art could or should be in any way useful. And it was admired by Pater, one of the leading influences on the English aesthetic movement of the 1880. Uh, Pater, in his conclusion to Renaissance, yes, spoke of the desire of beauty, the love of art for art's sake. Is a aesthetic movement by Pater. We find in this movement, this is the movement which blossomed during the 1880s. It was heavily influenced by the pre-Raphaelites, Ruskin and Pater, in which the adoption of sentimental archaism as the ideal of beauty was carried to extravagant lengths and often accompanied by affection of speech and manner and eccentricity of dress. This movement and its followers were much ridiculed in Punch, in Gilbert, Sullivan's Patience. There we find early essays for the Westminster Review and the Fortnightly Review also. Then the work Studies in the History of the Renaissance. There are also essays. It concerned with art, acclaimed by Waldo, traces the rebirth of Hellenism in medieval France, the art of Botticelli, Leonardo, and Michelangelo, classicism of Winkelmann, Marius, and Epicurean is a philosophical romance. Pater describes in it the boyhood, education, young manhood of Marius, serious young Roman imbued with a morbid religious idealism. There we find one of the work, imaginary portraits, that appreciations with an essay on style. There is another writer, James Anthony Froude. He was a historian actually. He wrote the work Short Studies on Great Subjects, which has 4 volumes. There is another work, History of England from the fall of Wolsey to the death of Elizabeth, defeat of the Spanish Armada, 12 volumes. After that, the English in Ireland in the 18th century, Caesar, Oceania or England and her colonies, the two chips of Dunby, Irish novel, biography of the Carlyle was issued during the period 1882 to 1884. There is another writer, Oliver Wendell Holmes. Holmes is actually a professor of anatomy and physiology at Harvard University. He wrote the work The Deacon's Masterpiece or The Wonderful One Horse Shay. The Autocrat of the Breakfast Table is a series of articles to the Atlantic Monthly. Professor in the Breakfast Table, The Poet at the Breakfast Table. Last one, Elsie Venner is a novel. There are some historians in this era. First one is Alexander William Lake. He wrote the work The Invention of the Crimea, that Eothane, which is a witty account of Eastern travel. Next writer is John Richard Green, who wrote a short history of the English people, the best work, The Making of the England, The Conquest of England. Edward Augustus Freeman, work is The History of the Norman Conquest of England, the reign of William Rufus, and the accession of Henry the First. Next writer is William Heckling Prescott. He wrote the work The History of Ferdinand and Isabella, The History of the Conquest of Mexico, The History of the Conquest of Peru. There was some scientists were also there, such as Charles Robert Darwin. He was naturalist on the Beagle. Yes, naturalist on the Beagle. He wrote the work The Voyage of the Beagle, on the origin of the species by means of natural selection, which appeared in 1859. So that the descent of man. So that Thomas Henry Huxley, he was a Darwin's supporter. He wrote the work Man's Place in Nature, lay sermons, addresses, and reviews, American addresses. There was a one movement, the Oxford movement was there in this era. It was the most important religious movement of the Victorian age. It was started at Oxford by a brilliant band of Oxonians, included John Cable, Edward Pusey, and John Henry Newman. The leaders and their followers were sometimes called the Tractarians because their views were expressed through their tracts for the time. The Oxford movement was also called the High Church. The Oxford movement was also called High Church movement. A sect of the Anglicans called the High Church stressed necessity of ceremonies and sacraments, expounded the apostolic succession of the church. But the critics of the movement branded it as an attempt to revive Catholic ritualism. However, the movement did one great service to the Church of England. It retained many people who might have gone to the Roman Church because of their love of criticism. And in this way, we find that the era of Georgia, uh, here we discuss the literature in this era, the development of literature in this. Here I stop. Thank you. See you.